Hello fellow cinephiles, Film Guru here. So in the lead up to Tarantino's new film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I've decided to go back and look at the 3 films that he wrote but didn't direct. Because I sort of want to look at the evolution of Tarantino as a filmmaker, and I think it's a good way to start with the films that he wrote before he became the director we all know and love now. The 3 films I'll be looking at today is True Romance, Natural Born Killers and From Dusk Till Dawn. So we'll start with True Romance. Now this was a film that he wrote in the 90s. He wanted to make it himself, ultimately wanted to get it done, but it didn't happen. And ultimately Tony Scott went on to direct it and crafted a unique film that really is Tony Scott's sort of movie. But the writing that Tarantino did in this made this film really interesting. And the film really looks at the lonely pop culture geek who marries a cool girl, steals cocaine from her pimp and tries to sell it in Hollywood. Meanwhile, the owners of the cocaine, the mob, track them down and attempt to reclaim it. So as you can already see, it's another one of his sort of crime sort of pictures in a way. But what's sort of different about this is it's really focused on the love story. And this was a theme that Tarantino started to look at early in his career. About love and also about relationships and what that sort of means and how that evolves within the pictures. This is his sort of early beginnings, so there is a strong sort of love story in this between Patricia Arquette's character Alabama and Christian Slater's character Clarence. It sort of looks at the unlikely pairing of these two and and what circumstances form for them to come together. And ultimately there's a bond that strikes between them and this really, really strong love story that sort of carries you through the film. And the scenes between Patricia Arquette and Christian Slater are fantastic. They both have really great chemistry and are really a product of the 90s, and they both really shine here in a really fantastic way. You could tell by this film that it has a lot of Tarantino's things that he would later use. His dialogue, his characters, his unique style of storytelling. This is a sort of real first linear film. Most of his films are non-linear, but this is the first sort of linear film that tells a story from start to finish. And that's obviously by Tony Scott's direction here. This film is filled with some really great cameos of particular actors who were sort of starting out and actors who'd been around for quite some time. So there's Brad Pitt early in his career before anyone really knew him, and he sort of steals the scenes that he's in. Gary Oldman's fantastic in it, playing a character called Drexel, who's ultimately a drug dealer but the way Gary Oldman plays his character, you sort of believe him. He's sort of this despicable character, and he's fantastic in there. She really shines in the film. Dennis Hopper and Christopher Walken have a scene together, and they're only in one scene for both of them. And this is a really great scene as well, and it's good to see these 2 actors shining, and there's great improvisation happening within this scene as well. And I really like the fact that Val Kilmer's in it. Val Kilmer sort of appears as Clarence's conscience in a way, I guess, or inner voice, and it comes out as an Elvis impersonation, and he's really great in it. You never actually see him clearly on screen, but you hear his voice, and the chemistry between him and Christian Slater really adds to these particular scenes. Tom Sizemore also makes an appearance, and Chris Penn. It's just filled with really colourful characters and interesting sort of storyline. And Sam Jackson also appears in it, which is kind of interesting. It's like, in some form or another, Sam Jackson has been in all of Tarantino's films, which I really like as well. I would have liked to see what Tarantino brought to this as a filmmaker. And I would have liked to have seen how he would have directed this, and if it would have changed the way people saw him as a filmmaker if he made this instead of Reservoir Dogs as his first film. The other thing that's sort of different about this is Christian Slater's character, Clarence, is ultimately Tarantino's alter ego. It's ultimately an interpretation of who Tarantino was. He sort of plays Tarantino in a way. It's a different character. It's a character and not actually Tarantino. But there's a lot of stuff that's sort of based on him. The love of comic books, working in a comic book store, love of movies, the way he speaks, the fascination he has with particular pop culture, and ultimately what Woody Allen does. He's always a Woody Allen character in his film, and this is the first time Tarantino really had a Tarantino-esque character in it. And I thought that was different as well. It's just a fun and entertaining movie. At the core of it, it's a love story between these 2 misfits and lonely people who come together and form such a bond, and the love that comes from that. And it's just a great and well done film in many ways. And like I said, I would have liked to see how Tarantino did it, because the biggest thing is, at the end of it, Clarence is meant to die in the original script that Tarantino comes up with, but in Tony Scott's version he doesn't. So that's where it sort of differs, but everything else is sort of his. And I think that's really refreshing to see this film now, and knowing Tarantino as a filmmaker, and to seeing the stuff he would use later in his films. So for me, I'd give True Romance 4 out of 5. I really liked it and was entertaining and fun, and I highly recommend it if you're a Tarantino fan, or just like a good sort of solid action film with a bit of heart and a bit of a love story. So the second film that he wrote and didn't direct is Natural Born Killers. Now obviously this went on to be made by Oliver Stone, and it is purely an Oliver Stone movie, which you can feel. But there's the characters and the love story and things that are created by Tarantino that are still there. Yet again, it's another film that involves a unique love story. This time it looks at the love story of these two people who were ultimately serial killers. So this was something different. And in the credits you will see that Tarantino wrote the story, but Oliver Stone and two other writers wrote the script. So they obviously took his ideas and the characters he created and just went with it and did something different. Oliver Stone talked about how he was going to just make a good action film, and he was going to had a great Tarantino script, and he was going to just straight for an action flick. But ultimately he came up with different ideas. He looked at the idea of how the media is used and how they glorify people who do bad things, and really people's obsession with the media and reading and watching the media and believing everything they say is the truth. And this sort of tackles that. It's like no holes barred sort of film. It's definitely not for the weak of heart, because it is kind of traumatic and it's pure chaos, the movie. There's so many chaotic things happening. The characters are quite psychotic, and it's hard to get behind them at times when they do these horrific things. But ultimately, at the heart of it is yet again a love story, and this real connection between these two misfits, sort of traumatized young people who come together and form such a bond. And the love story is what connects you to it. It's what gets you through the traumatic events that happen, the violence within the film, to see how these people form this relationship, how they bond and how they evolve ultimately. And it's really everybody else around them is a bit psychotic. Not just them, they all point out how bad they are. But they're not as bad as people make them out to be. Yes, they do to kill people, and that's wrong, I do get that, but it's just the events that happen to form them to do these sort of horrific crimes and murders that they are able to ultimately do in this film. Obviously the real standouts here are Woody Harrelson, who plays Mickey Knotts, and he's fantastic. He really shines within the film. He plays a psycho really well, and there's some really great moments with him and Juliette Lewis in this, and their chemistry is fantastic to watch on screen. I think Juliette Lewis really steals the show in this film. I think she's fantastic. She has moments where she sort of sings, she's sort of psychotic, she's sort of sweet. There's so many aspects to her character that I just really get sucked into her performance here, and I like every time that she's on screen. I just think she's a unique actress who really talks about acting as playing, like you would as a kid, making up stories and characters and scenarios. And she just sort of reacts in the moment, and I love watching her on screen. She's just fantastic to watch. And like I said, the chemistry between her and Woody Harrelson is fantastic. It's filled with a number of colourful cameo performances as well, much like True Romance is. We have Tom Sizemore once more, playing a sort of Scagnetti, a sort of cop who's sort of obsessed with Mickey Mallory and ultimately wants sort of to become them in a way, in a psychotic sort of crazy way. Tommy Lee Jones is fantastic as well, who plays the warden of the prison. And the other real star of this is Robert Downey Jr. Absolutely fantastic. And he just ultimately wants to interview Mickey. And ultimately when Mickey's arrested, they have this moment where he's able to interview. The film really is the idea, especially the ending when they're in prison, Mickey and Mallory in prison, and they escape. It looks at how this is ultimately the bowels of hell, and they have to escape out of hell. And that's what this whole sequence feels like. It's chaotic the way it's shot. It's uniquely done. There's a lot of violence in it and stuff that sort of turns you off, and sort of a lot of sort of dark and imagery that you see throughout the film, and especially within this sequence, that's just proves once again that this is hell in a way, and that maybe that Tommy Lee Jones's character is maybe the devil and Scagnetti's a demon. That's sort of how I feel when I see the ending of this film. I would have liked to have seen what Tarantino would have done with this. I think he would have crafted something similar to True Romance, a bit more of a straighter, linear sort of film than what we got here. Even though I'm a big fan of this film, it's not something I can watch all the time. It's quite psychotic and chaotic, and it's a bit much. But what really keeps me there when I do see this film is the characters. It's Woody Harrelson and Juliette Lewis's performances and the love story within it. Yet again, another focus on love and relationships that Tarantino seemed to have in these two early films that he wrote but didn't direct. And I think that's a very fascinating and interesting idea within these films as well. So I'd give Natural Born Killers 4 out of 5. I enjoyed this film. It's not a film for everyone. You can't watch it all the time, but there is a lot of interesting ideas, and at the essence there is this love story that Tarantino is creating. So the last in the 3 of the films that he wrote but didn't direct is From Dusk to Dawn. Now this film he wrote 20 pages of years ago, I think around sort of the similar time he may have done Natural Born Killers, but it wasn't made and he didn't complete the script until after Reservoir Dogs. And this is where a friendship formed between him and Robert Rodriguez at Cannes Film Festival. Robert Rodriguez had El Mariachi and Tarantino had Reservoir Dogs, and this bond and friendship formed between these two. And Robert Rodriguez was really interested in working with Tarantino in some form, and that's when he showed him the script of From Dusk Till Dawn. And he completed this and ultimately made this film with Robert Rodriguez. Look, this film really is about two brothers. It's about Richie and Seth Gecko, who are ultimately criminals, and who Seth escapes prison with the help of Richie, and there's a bank robbery that goes wrong, and they ultimately kill people and take a hostage. And it really looks at the bond between these two brothers and how they're on the run and they get swept up in this particular world and this story. And this is a kind of unique take on the vampire genre, where we set up these particular two criminal characters and we think it's going to be sort of a straightforward sort of road movie, criminals evading cops and trying to find their way through things. And it quickly, halfway through, turns into this whole horror vampire thing that you don't expect, but it kind of works for what they're going for here. Yet again, I think this is filled with a lot of Tarantino's characters that he creates and storylines, and it ultimately is about love again. It's about the love that Richie and Seth have for each other, and also the relationships that Juliette Lewis's character and Harvey Keitel as father and daughter have as well. This is sort of what this film has. It has a lot of Tarantino in it, but ultimately it's really a Robert Rodriguez film. That's what it feels like, that's what it looks like, and that's what you get a sense of from it, even though there is the characters that Tarantino did create and it is something he did write. It just doesn't feel like him. I would like to see what he would have done with it if he did direct it as well. And once again, this film is filled with interesting and colourful characters and a lot of great cameos, especially from Juliette Lewis, who returns in this film after Natural Born Killers. And it has Harvey Keitel, which he used in Reservoir Dogs, who plays the father and sort of the heart of the film, and I really like him. And he's an interesting sort of character. It has early John Hawkes in it. It also has Michael Parks. Now, this was the first introduction I had of this particular actor, and the way that Tarantino writes for him, the dialogue is just fantastically, brilliantly executed in this film. But the real standouts here are obviously George Clooney as Seth Gecko. He's absolutely fantastic, and this is the film that really made him shine and showed the world he could be an action hero. And all because of Tarantino's writing and Robert Rodriguez's directing, and he shines so fantastically. He has funny moments, he has great action moments. He's a character, even though he's a con man and a villain and a bad guy, you can sort of get behind him and you really feel for him. And the other is Tarantino himself playing Richie Gecko. He's really great in this and plays a real psychotic, crazy sort of character, and the chemistry between him and Clooney is evident, and they're really fantastic on screen together. And you can really feel that they're brothers and there's a bond between them. I always felt at the end of this film that Juliette Lewis would go on to be a vampire hunter. I would have loved to have seen that. And then they're sort of doing that in a way with a TV series, which I highly recommend if you haven't seen it. It's fantastic. At the essence, yes, it is Tarantino did write this script, but it just doesn't feel like the films he would later make. And it's the most uniquely different film he did of combining two genres together in a unique way. And I would give From Dusk Till Dawn 4 out of 5 as well. It's another one of those. Those three films are really solid in their own unique way. I think True Romance is probably the better of those three films, but I am a big fan of all of them. But like I said, these are the three films that he wrote and didn't direct. And I just wanted to throw them into part of the reviews we're doing for Tarantino films, because I think you can get a real sense of the filmmaker he wanted to be and the stories he wanted to tell. I think at the center of all of his movies is the idea of relationships and love. He's always seeking and searching for it in these sort of films. Whether it's the father and son dynamic, whether it's brothers, whether it's romantic love, it's all part of his stories in some form. He makes them sort of personal. Anyway, that's all for me today. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit subscribe down the bottom. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.